is it? Why is it that the broadcast media have been quite so uniform and apocalyptic about coronavirus? It's been a utterly historic couple of days in terms of the evolution of our traditional media alongside social media, and the way those two things interact. Firstly, after those disgraceful scenes on Capitol Hill, we had, I think, the more dangerous development that Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, became the most powerful man in the world. He decided to take away the digital voice of the elected president, previously the most powerful man in the world. And, you know, it was a really stunning move. I'm of the opinion that censorship always leads to suspicion, anger, conspiracy, and it creates more danger than airing views, however unpleasant. And then just prior to that, we had the complete expunging of a major mainstream Murdoch-owned radio station, Ofcom regulated mainstream radio station that broadcasts on the airwaves here in the UK, Talk Radio, was expunged from YouTube by Mark Zuckerberg's counterpart at Google. And it's really, we're seeing now these tech giants asserting themselves as the most powerful people in the world, arguably in human history. And Talk Radio was reinstated, I think, after Michael Gove made quite a forthright intervention in the morning. But what Talk Radio were expunged for is what this video is about, and it's something I've written an article about. And it's these two instances that I've just spoken about that have happened since the article sort of confirmed what I was saying. So the article, the link will be in the description, and please do click subscribe, because I'm going to make one of these videos every time I do an article. So the article was about what Talk Radio was expunged for. They were kicked off YouTube for publishing clips which ran counter to the local or national advice on coronavirus. That is specifically a YouTube policy now, that you cannot contradict local government advice on coronavirus or you will be kicked off the platform. And they had published short videos which did that. They have admitted that, you know, the clips taken as a whole with different guests giving different views are acceptable, but isolated clips they won't have. So this got me thinking, you know, well, this is what I was writing about, that a lot of people have pointed out to me, why is it that the broadcast media have been quite so uniform and apocalyptic about coronavirus? Why do they only show the bad news and not the good news? You know, there is good news. You know, coronavirus is very dangerous. It is at least 10 times more deadly than the flu. Probably multiple times of that. Okay, it is particularly dangerous with certain groups. Mainly, the main sort of determinant is age. But why do they never show the good news? Why, if we're not learning that the death rate is up nearly as high as it was in March? That's never brought. We're not learning that the percentage of people that catch this virus that die is falling. They never raise these things. We'd never hear that the average age of death is 80, I think 2, and my life expectancy as a British man is 81. So we never hear these things. And I think both of them should be heard. And I think actually the Talk Radio example begins to explain why. Because these platforms, these journalists who rely on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, YouTube is incredibly lucrative, right? And it brings in money for people's whole livelihoods depend on it. And we in there is your example. There's your explanation. How can you put your whole livelihood at risk just to talk about the positives of coronavirus? You're not going to do it, are you? If you're a journalist that relies on their income. My income isn't dependent on YouTube, so I can say this. But so it's a really interesting question, and I think I'm going to play you a clip now from Emily Maitlis when she actually says something quite stark, and she quite bluntly admits that journalists need to only share some views because they can't share others because people might start thinking themselves.
Isn't that the point? That it's hard to disagree with the principle of freedom of speech, but, Toby, if we start oxygenating views that encourage a change in behaviour that leads to a greater number of deaths, that is dangerous.
Extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, she is basically saying that we can't give people all of the facts because they might be too fond of their freedom and they might start breaking the rules. And that poses a very, very deep question, that is it journalists' job to help condition the public to the government's message? Or is it the journalist's job to give as much information, all the information, and let the public decide for themselves? I can't answer that question definitively. You know, in times of war, people always say you should hold back on certain information, and people might say that there are these anti-vax, dangerous, delusional anti-vax movements, and, you know, feeding the beast is going to kill millions of people. But it certainly seems that journalists have taken a view on this, and mainstream journalists have taken a view on this, and they are only going to broadcast the negative, or at least the Google and government sanctioned narrative on coronavirus, because they are scared that people will break the rules and people may die. And the other great danger of this is, of course, we don't actually know if lockdowns are going to save lives in the long run. You know, the economic damage, the family problems, the destitution, the poverty that they cause may, in the long run, kill more than the virus. And if journalists have intentionally made people scared, fearful, so they follow the rules, they are responsible for that, possibly? I don't know, that might be going too far. And what is the result of this style of reporting where only the government line is essentially acceptable? Well, what we've seen is actually people, when you poll them, are incredibly misinformed about how dangerous coronavirus is. The British public were asked back in July about how deadly, or what percentage of the population they thought had succumbed to the virus. The answer they gave, the mean average answer they gave, was roughly 100 times greater than reality. The British public, the mean answer given by the British public was 100 times greater. They thought that this virus had killed as many people as it had done among fighting age men, British men in the First World War. That's how misinformed they were. So that was the median average. The mean average, the most common answer given, was still 10 times greater than the reality about how deadly this virus is. I think 95%, it was 95% of people were misinformed on this point, you know. So we're incredibly misled on this. You know, misinformation about vaccines, widely held, you know, believed misinformation on vaccines is dangerous. But why isn't this dangerous too, you know? People are positively, you know, confused about this. And it's amazing that there hasn't been an effort to correct this. And in fact, what is really striking is the new fact checkers. These are very important fact checkers today. Every news channel has them. I think Full Fact is one of the most prominent fact checker in the country. And Full Fact addressed this question rather than trying to tackle the fact that 95% of people were misinformed on this point. They actually said, no, we're going to try and fact check this story that people thought it was 100 times, that people were misinformed. They thought it was 100 times more dangerous than it is. So they didn't try and, you know, tackle the perceived, the widely held misconception. They went the other way. And what did they do? Basically, their argument was that, no, it's not 100. People don't think it's 100 times more deadly than it is. They only think it's 10 times more deadly. But they didn't even recognise that people thinking it 10 times more deadly than it is was even a problem. So fact checkers are only fact checking one side, you know, they're going along with this journalistic thing. They are reinforcing this public fear. They're even, Full Fact, the most popular fact checking website in the country, even then ran an article fact checking the claim that the Blitz was as deadly as coronavirus, which is extraordinary, isn't it? And they said, yes, it is, but because it killed the same proportion of the people in the country, but they didn't sort of address the fact that obviously the Blitz, you know, indiscriminately killed babies, children, burnt our cities to the ground, ruined our infrastructure, all that kind of thing. You know, the coronavirus, as I've said, the average age of death is 82, I think. So that's a wildly misleading headline for a fact checker to write. A sort of headline that you would expect a fact checker to have a go at a tabloid for publishing. So, you know, the fact checkers are definitely part of the problem. And in my view, fact checkers are just the latest instance, the latest example of what I call the impartiality lie. The idea that mainstream journalists are, you know, able to be completely in the middle on every single issue. They're able to be completely non-biased on everything, which I think is a lie. I made a whole video about that, so I shan't get into that. So it's just something really interesting. And then, you know, the journalists are scared of getting kicked off social media. And then I think actually what's really interesting is the social media firms are actually scared of accusations from the journalists. Just after, as they did after Brexit and after Trump, it was blamed on misinformation spread on Facebook. Brexit wouldn't have happened, Trump wouldn't have happened if misinformation hadn't been allowed to proliferate on Facebook. So in turn, the social media websites are blocking and censoring more stuff because they're scared of the journalists. The journalists are scared of the social media sites. And you can see how fear spreads. It spreads like a virus. And we're all scared of this virus. And I think we're too scared, personally. I'm not a scientist. I give my wholly, admittedly unscientific point of view here. But I do think that that is something that we need to watch. But then again, we may never know if lockdown has been more damaging than the virus, because it will be impossible to quantify how many people died of depression, suicide, impoverishment, because no one does daily bulletins on that, you know, so we may never know. But I think we should watch it in the future. I think that lockdowns may well be the right course, and we may well do the right thing to follow them, but we do need to ask ourselves and our society if it is right that that we know the public are misinformed at this point and we tolerate it and we don't try and address it. Is that an acceptable place to be, where the public are knowingly misinformed? It's a really interesting point. And I think we need a debate about it. I don't think we're going to get that debate, but I'm trying to start one here. So if you liked the video, please do hit subscribe, and I'm going to try and do a few more. But yeah, thank you very much for watching. Okay, bye-bye.